check their name tags there, right?
I think so.
Okay.
We're more concerned
thought
what's in
so.
the bag. We're more concerned what's in the bag. No.
Good evening. I'm Mark Knudsen. I'm the CEO with Tualatin Valley Water District. We want to thank everybody for being here. I was promised that I was told I would keep my comments short, and so I will honor that. And basically, I just want to welcome everyone and express appreciation for you being here. We've got a really important topic to cover this evening, a very exciting panel, and a lot of great information to cover. And so rather than belabor my comments, I'm just going to simply introduce our board president, Marilyn McWilliams.
Thank you, Mark. Hi. We on the board aim to bring you quality water, customer service, and value. Those are our aspirations, and we really want to do a good job for you. We really appreciate the fact that you've come out tonight to discuss this important topic of lead in the water, because it's important for us to learn more about it. A couple of years ago, we started working on our Willamette water supply project, and we had a number of open houses, and a lot of the public came and made comments, came up with ideas, and so on. And it helped us to fine-tune our water quality project, and we really appreciate that. So we're hoping tonight that we can have a two-way conversation, that we can share in some of your wisdom about this issue, and that you can hear, some of the experts that we have on the panel. So I would like to just go right ahead and introduce to you our director of, Alex Cousins, our Communications and Public Affairs Supervisor. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, President McWilliams. Good evening, everyone. And I don't fault President McWilliams for not having that down. I've only been with the district for about 7 months. I'm Alex Cousins, and welcome and appreciate you guys joining us tonight for this forum. It's part of our culture of the organization to start every meeting with a safety moment. And as I was thinking about our safety moment tonight, it occurred to me that this entire meeting is really a safety moment, because we're here to talk about lead and water safety. But we'll do a routine safety moment. In the event we need to evacuate this building for any reason, there are exit doors right behind you here, and also the entrance that you came in is open as well. So we have three exits right here behind you. Either one will do, and we convene in the parking area out front if we need to leave the building for any reason. We're here because this is a really important topic, and I know that you think that too, or you wouldn't be here. Lead in water has been in the news almost daily for quite a number of days and weeks now. And so we thought we would get together with our partners and do something a little bit proactive to provide an educational opportunity for our customers and our partners and our stakeholders here in Washington County to talk about this important issue. And if you have any questions, hopefully we'll be able to address those tonight. We have these cards. Hopefully you picked one up when you signed in out front, but didn't really do a comment form specifically. But if you have any questions that come to mind as you're seeing the presentation, we've got a PowerPoint that our expert panel will be going through here in a minute. And we'd ask you to hold your questions while they're giving the presentation, and then we're going to have plenty of time after the presentation to engage in discussion with you. So these are here. If you just have a thought or a question or comment you want to jot down, feel free to make a note of that. And after the presentation is over, I'll be fielding questions from you for the panel. And we also have some questions on the front of the card. We haven't done many of these types of community forums before, so we'd love to get some feedback from you about whether you think this is a good thing to do, and if you would come to something like this in the future. We'd love to get your feedback, and you could just leave this on the table on your way out. Yeah, I think that was what I was going to cover there. We also have Tualatin Valley Community Television here with us, so you're part of an audience here. We're not broadcasting this meeting tonight, So there's nothing live happening, but we thought this was a good opportunity to videotape the proceedings and make this available through the district's website. And it's good information. Let's share it further. And we've had a number of our water industry partners that have reached out to us and said, we'd love to see that when you're done. We'd love to see how the meeting goes. So with that, I will introduce our expert panel, and then I'll get out of the way and let them do the presenting. I'd like to introduce Bill Richmond here on the end. Bill is TVWD's water quality analyst who specializes in administering the district's lead and copper monitoring program. So Bill is our guy when it comes to this topic. Bill also holds both water distribution and treatment certifications from the state of Oregon. And sitting next to Bill is Joel Carey. Joel leads TVWD's water quality program, and he has over 12 years of experience in the field of water quality. He holds both water distribution and treatment certifications from the state as well, and he oversees the district's entire water quality program. Next to Joel is Dr. Christine Baumann. Dr. Baumann is the health officer for Washington County and the Tri-County Deputy Health Officer. She is a physician and is board certified in internal medicine and preventative medicine. Dr. Baumann is also an affiliate instructor at the Department of Public Health and Preventative Medicine at OHSU. Next to Dr. Baumann is Nathan Potter. Nathan is administrator for the Maintenance and Custodial Department for the Beaverton School District for the past 2 years. Prior to that, he was with ODOT for 11 years. Nathan is a licensed engineer in Oregon and Colorado, and he has spent 18 years in the Oregon National Guard. And Nathan has 2 children, one in this Beaverton School District and one about to be in the Beaverton School District. And then finally, bringing us home at the end there is Dave Kraska. Dave is the program director for the Willamette Water Supply Program, and he's been in that role for just over a year now. The Willamette Water Supply Program is the partnership between Tualatin Valley Water District and the City of Hillsborough to develop the Mid-Willamette River as a new regional water source of drinking water by 2026. So you'll be hearing more about that program tonight. Dave is a registered professional engineer in Oregon and was formerly with Carollo Engineers for 26 years. So with that, I will turn it over to our panel.
All right, thank you, Alex, and thank you all for being here tonight on a very pleasant summer evening. Obviously, it's an important topic, and your time is valuable. So can you hear me okay through this? Great. Okay, so we're just going to jump right into a brief history of lead. What is lead? Lead is a heavy metal found in the Earth's crust. It's also found in trace amounts in soil, plants, and sometimes water. It is from the Latin word plumbum. Plumbum gives us our periodic symbol Pb, means liquid silver. So anyone back in the medieval times that worked with lead was known as a plumber, so that all kind of ties together. It's known as the father of all metals. It was used in anything from condiments to pottery and dishware. It had many different uses before we knew its dangers. So it is dangerous. It's a neurotoxin. Affects soft nerve tissue and also brain development. And Dr. Baumann will probably talk a little bit more about that, but can be bad stuff. So, does anyone happen to know when the first law was created that banned lead? I'll give you some choices. 76? 76? Good answer. That's Safe Drinking Water Act time. It was actually a little bit earlier. It was 1696. And so how this came about, there was a German physician named Duke Ludwig, and he was investigating a colic outbreak back in the late 1600s. People experiencing a lot of gastrointestinal problems, really bad stomach aches. So in his investigation, he spent some time with some German monks who, of course, like to drink wine, and they were experiencing the stomach aches. He's meeting with them, getting some stomach aches himself, but at the same time, there's actually some monks that didn't drink wine, and they were not experiencing those issues. So they kind of put 2 and 2 together, and they determined that in this area, they were using a lead additive to sweeten the wine. So once they found that out, they took the lead out, and the stomach aches went away. So they actually made it a law not to put lead back into the wine at all, and punishment by death if you were found to do so. So it's a little history on there. 6500 BC is also notable. That was the first known lead mine back in Turkey. So it goes way back, and we know that lead concerns are not new. So fast forward a little bit. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that drinking water can contribute up to 20% of one's exposure to lead. Our most vulnerable populations are pregnant women and young children. So in 1991, the Environmental Protection Agency said, hey, let's start testing the water and finding out what's going on, particularly in home plumbing. So they wanted to just reduce the amount of leaching that was coming from lead and copper at customers' taps. So that's what they really focused on. Focus number one was high-risk homes. So when we talk about high-risk homes, we call them Tier 1 homes. So to provide a little bit of background, starting in the 70s and 80s, homes were, that's when they started plumbing homes with copper pipes. And to join those copper pipes, they used solder. And up until 1986, June of 1986, there was an appreciable amount of lead in that solder. So you can see where they kind of heat the pipe, add the solder, and then this is kind of the finished product after a while. That solder can kind of seep inside the pipe. And when water sits in direct connection with that solder, that's how it leaches off. So they said, let's look at these Tier 1 homes. Tier 1 home, the true definition is a home that was built between 1983 and 1985. And they also wanted to focus on worst case scenario water. So we're looking at the high-risk homes and water that isn't typically running through your system. It's water that's been sitting in those pipes for a period of time, a minimum of 6 hours. And then they established an action level. So the action level means that, and it gets a little tricky, but essentially when you pool your results, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the coming slides, when you put your results together, they want to see that 90% of your homes are below the action level of 15 parts per billion. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go, but those were the three main criteria of the lead and copper rule. So in 1992, we did some initial sampling. All public water systems began sampling in 1992. We took 2 initial rounds 6 months apart. We took about 100 samples per round. And from 93 to 97, we continued to collect what we call parameter testing. We test for pH. pH is a big factor in this, and probably some of us up here will talk more about that. But chemistry of water, if you have a high pH, the water's not so corrosive. If it's lower, it is corrosive. There's rule development through 97, and then in 98, we began sampling. And at that time, we also joined what's called the Joint Monitoring Program. So the Joint Monitoring Program consists of Portland Water Bureau wholesale customers. There's about a dozen public water systems. And what we would do is we would individually sample our own systems, and then we would pool those results together. There were, and just to give you some frame of reference, in the Joint Monitoring Program, which still exists today, through about roughly of those 12 public water systems, collectively we take about 100 to 110 samples each round. Tualatin Valley Water District is responsible for about 40 of those. And in 2007, there were some rule revisions to the EPA's lead and copper rule, mostly dealing with public education and outreach, monitoring requirements, and lead service line removal. So let's just go back briefly to the 90th percentile, and I'll do my best to explain this. The 90th percentile result is what is, that result is used to determine if the water system will be required to implement additional actions. So I may have missed it on the back slide, but those additional actions include the public education, the removal of those lead service lines, if you have lead service lines. And a side note, TVWD, Tualatin Valley Water District, has never used lead service lines. So to calculate the 90th percentile, let's look at our last round of sampling. This is what took place in spring, just a month or so, about 2 months ago. And what you do is you list all your results from lowest down to highest. ND means non-detect. So the first 6 samples had no detection of lead. And what you do is you look at the number of samples that were collected, which was 42, and that number should be adjacent to your highest result. So then what you do is multiply 42 samples by 0.9 to get 90%. Round up, you get number 38. So number 38 here, the adjacent number is 6 parts per billion. That is Tualatin Valley Water District's individual 90th percentile number. So essentially, to meet the rule, 90% of your homes should fall below 15 parts per billion. We have about 98% of our homes falling below 15 parts per billion. We had 1 or 2 that were kind of close, and then, wow, 113 parts per billion. We were alarmed. Portland Water Bureau's, the lab is alarmed. So what happened here? We'll talk real quick about that. When this result came back, it was higher than anything we had ever seen in monitoring results. So we contacted the customer. This customer has been in our, this home, I should say, has been part of our monitoring program for a number of years. And talking with the customer, it turned out that someone in the home had inadvertently collected the lead and copper sample, not from the cold water tap, but the hot water tap, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, but corrodes much faster than cold water coming through the hot water heater. And it was taken from a back bathroom that is rarely used. So very, very long holding time with that water, hot water, kind of all the, you talk about a worst case scenario, that's what you have. So what we did was, talking with this customer, we always offer to do a retest. Any result that's even close to the action level, we offer another test kit, send that out. This result stays validated. It stays part of the sampling pool. But when the results came back from the retest, we saw 2 parts per billion, just under 6 parts per billion. So we did 2 standing samples. And then we always do a running sample just to see what that result will turn out to be once the water sitting in the home plumbing has been flushed out. So after a 2-minute flush, that result went down to less than 1 part per billion. So it really indicates that flushing the water is effective, and more on that later. So we'll get back to 90th percentiles. This is just kind of a look at going back to 99. Well, let's go back to 92. These are joint monitoring program collective results. So again, about a dozen water systems all pooling our results together. And you're looking at spring and fall of 92 over on the left here. And it says pre-treatment. So we talked a little bit about that. Pre-treatment means that the water had not been treated to increase the pH. It was just raw water, but still treated for disinfection, not treated for corrosion. So after those first 2 rounds, pretty high 90th percentile. Portland began adding the corrosion control in about 1998 or sometime through the 90s. And as you can see, beginning in 1999 and throughout, those results slowly came down. Although we still have a few high results, higher than the action level. And as you'll see, the 2 times in the last 10 years, we've exceeded, as a joint monitoring program, that 15 parts per billion. Then we like to overlay it with Tualatin Valley Water District's individual results. Now, these aren't results that we necessarily submit to the state, but we keep track of this just for our own data and to let customers know that of the 42 samples that we collect every 6 months, these have been our 90th percentile results over that time. Roughly half of what the joint monitoring results are. So pretty low. Yes, we do still see an individual home occasionally with a high result, but overall our numbers look pretty good. And as Dave will talk a little bit about, I think, coming up next, certainly not Flint-like numbers. Very, very low. Dave, I think we're on to you.
Good intro.
Thanks.
Should have just thrown it.
Yeah, just throw it my way. Yeah, I won't catch it though. Good evening. Thanks again for coming tonight. So I'm sure you've heard through the news stories over the past year the challenges the water quality challenges that Flint, Michigan has been experiencing. And so you might have a question or two about whether there's any parallels between their experience and ours, and if there's any danger that we might experience here. So it's fair to compare the two. So if we look at comparing Flint, Michigan to TVWD, and I apologize, I'm going to have to turn a little bit away from you while I make this presentation to remind myself what my slide says, but let's start off with the lead service lines. In Flint, Michigan, there's thousands of them. To the point that they actually don't know how many. I wanted to put tens of thousands, but I had some that were close to about 10,000 and some that were close to about 30,000. So there's work to do on their side just to find out how many they are, but there's many, many, many of them. The Flint River is highly corrosive, so corrosive to the point that the auto industry in the area won't use water from Flint River because they found that it corroded their parts, and so they couldn't use them. So even the auto industry wouldn't use the Flint River water. The Flint River, this is a long story that I won't get into now. I'll be glad to answer during Q&A if you're interested. But Flint River was a complete replacement. When they brought it online, they completely replaced the water that they had been receiving for decades from Detroit. Recommended improvements were not implemented. So before they made this change to the Flint River, some experts had recommended that they make some changes, they do some improvements to the system. Those were not done. And finally, there was ineffective communication with the health agencies. All of this has come into light through all the investigations that are currently ongoing, and they're all really spelled trouble for the community in Flint. On the TVWD side, we start off with no lead service lines. So one of the main contributors to lead in the system are lead in people's homes. It simply isn't a risk here in TVWD service area. The supplies are not corrosive. The various supplies that the TVWD receives do not have the same corrosive tendencies or characteristics of the Flint River. The Willamette supply, as said, is being integrated, but actually will be integrated. We're about 10 years away from actually integrating that supply, and it won't be a wholesale replacement of supplies currently received to the system. It's going to be integrated with current supplies. And along with that integration, we will be making recommended improvements that will be implemented as part of the program that I'll speak to a little bit later in my presentation. And then finally, we are doing extensive coordination with the health agencies, and we've also invited to be part of our team, or actually look over what we're doing, outside experts to ask us questions and to make sure that we're not skipping anything that we need to pay attention to. Turning back to Bill.
Thanks, Dave. All right, great. Thank you, Dave. So what have we been doing lately, and what do we continue to do? What have we been doing? We remain in compliance. We continue to collect roughly 40 samples every 6 months. We send all those results to the State Drinking Water Program. We also offer free lead testing to every residential customer. Hopefully you all know that, and by the end of the night you will know that. Well, you know that now. That's part of the benefit of the joint monitoring program that we're in currently. And to date, well, since 2006, 1,300 TVWD customers have taken advantage of the free lead and water testing. So it's been pretty successful, and we just really feel good about offering that. We also undertook a large meter replacement program. That was active back about 2008, 2009. Meters get old. We like to meter the water just so we get revenue for the water that you use. But it was kind of a X amount of meters per year. It was budgeted. But when we started talking about, we talked about lead a while back, and large meters sometimes use lead components. It's pretty well known in the industry. So our management and Board of Commissioners just took it upon themselves to say, hey, let's not take any chances. Let's accelerate this program and remove every old meter in the system that's 3 inches and larger. So by the end of 2009, all 225 3-inch and larger meters had been replaced with new lead-free meters. We continue to provide public outreach and education in the form of lead brochures and information on our website. We have a lead task force. I feel really good about that. That's something rather new in the last couple months. And basically, it's an interdepartmental meeting that we have once a week right now. And we just discussed ways of better communication with our customers, with basically our community. And things like this lead forum have come out of that meeting. So we hope to continue this form of communication. And we've been offering expertise and guidance to businesses, key customers, large customers, and schools regarding lead testing. So Joel's going to talk a little bit about our water sources.
All right. Thank you, Bill. I'd just like to take this time just to pause for a second and just say, you know, one of the things we wanted to point out with this presentation is that, as Bill mentioned early on, that lead is not new. So we really wanted folks to get the point that there's been a lot of work we've done in the past, and also as we move in the future, there's going to be a lot more things that we are doing. Regarding your water sources here, quick show of hands in the room if you're not too camera shy. Anybody know in general where some of their water sources come? Obviously the map's up there, but like our CEO does apparently. So
That's a good thing.
and so do our commissioners as well. So yeah, so a little bit of background about TVWD, and this does tie into why we are in the Joint Monitoring Program. And like Dave said, I'm going to turn around just a little bit so I can use the laser pointer here for you folks. So one of the big reasons we're in the joint, or the main reason we're in the Joint Monitoring Program, is because of this source right here and this source right here. Those are the sources of water that are operated by the Portland Water Bureau. Going back to the previous slide, in 1997, that's when we joined that program. About 60% of our supply comes from Portland. That's the primary reason why we're in that program. It is, again, by definition, the majority of our supply. The other portion of supply that we get is what's called the Joint Water Commission. That would be Barney Reservoir and Hag Lake up there. Barney is one of these storage reservoirs we have capacity in. That supply does go through a treatment plant. If you're driving south of Forest Grove, going past Hag Lake, it's on the Tualatin River out there. So that water supply is a treated source. There are some differences between these supplies. That's one of them. Portland supply is treated, just not to the same degree that Joint Water Commission is. It doesn't go through a conventional treatment plant, if you will. There is still things like pH adjustment done, other various forms of treatment processes put in place as well. So, and then the third one we use is our ASR wells. ASR stands for Aquifer Storage and Recovery. That's something we started in 2007. We have essentially a well where we put surface water that's been treated underground and store it in the winter and use it in the summer. So it doesn't make up a huge portion of our supply. We use it for what's called augmentation. Essentially that means during this time of year when we get the warmest weather, it helps us meet those peak demands. So those are our current supplies right now, and again, that's one of the reasons why we're in the JMP. So, as Dave mentioned earlier, our future supply will be the Mid-Willamette. Dave's going to speak about that a little bit more later, some more details. He's got some great slides at the end of this that'll help us sort of understand what's going on with that program and where we're headed with that. So, our next slide, we wanted to help folks understand the source-to-home thing. So, the Flint situation really brought a lot of that to light, why they were having such problems, and why our region as a whole is different. So in this slide, what we're trying to do is sort of highlight the fact that we have multiple sources, as you can see from these diagrams up here. Surface water sources, that includes everything like the Bull Run system, Hag Lake, Barney Reservoir, things of that nature. Treatment plant, obviously, for that side of the supply chain, and groundwater and ASR wells, groundwater being part of Portland's and our ASR wells. So there's a variety of things we use to meet our entire demands. I mean, that's kind of by design, obviously. That gives us a lot of redundancy. That gives us options to work with. So this really is a huge benefit to the district, the fact that we do have these multiple options. So again, that kind of represents the whole entire source bubble. So as water moves through our system, this is kind of a big portion of it that we wanted folks to take away in this presentation. The key thing being moving. So as Bill mentioned earlier, when you do sampling in a home, you know, the key thing to remember about that is that it's the whole time. It's the time that the water sits in that home plumbing system that can contribute and pull some of that lead back out. In our system, in general, we try and keep the water moving. There's a lot of things that we do operationally to make sure that happens. But in general, it's one big key difference between our system and, say, a home system. So again, as the water moves to this system, multiple size pipes, the biggest ones being all the way at the source end, all the way down through our system. Out in the street out there on 170th, we have pipes anywhere from 12 to 24 inches. Some streets actually have multiple pipes you probably might not see as you're driving around, but they are there delivering water each and every day. So, service lines, as Dave mentioned earlier, that's kind of a big deal. That was really what was a large factor in Flint, and that switched to that different source. So TVWD doesn't have lead service lines. And how do we know this? Well, there's a lot of good reasons why we know this. So system operations. So when I say system operations, that would be things like our staff going out, doing repairs. We're talking about decades of experience that we've seen in the area with all of our staff doing main replacements, repairs. That's a really big critical component that we like to highlight because, again, our guys are out there a lot seeing things. So, we just don't have those in our system. And the age of the system. We're not nearly as old as some of those other systems, as some of the aging infrastructure around the country. TVWD's system, relatively new. Even some of the older spots that we have are still relatively new compared to a lot of those things. And I would even point out, as you walk out of the lobby today, there's actually a piece of wooden pipe that came out of a very, very old section of the system. That stuff, obviously, we don't use wooden pipe anymore, do we? So it's probably not the most efficient type of water delivery, but I highlight it because that's the kind of stuff that 100 years ago was used and where some of this stuff stems from, some of these problems stem from. And testing. We have a wealth of data that we look at that we use to make sure that we know nothing's out there causing these kind of concerns. So that's what we do. We're the water quality specialists. We're data guys. We like to look through this stuff. So we are doing testing. We have been, and we're continuing to do more, as we'll talk about a little bit later. And what else do we do? Well, we're always improving our operations, always trying to improve everything we do, i.e. why we're here tonight. We're always looking to what, some of the language we use is called system optimization. That's really a nice fancy terminology for means we sit down with our operations folks and look at everything we can do to improve the way we deliver water. Making sure that water is moving where it needs to go, making sure we reduce the amount of time that the water sits anywhere in storage tanks, constantly making sure that we're looking at the chemistry, providing the best level of operation we can for our customers. And another big component is we've had a really active flushing program. I'm sure some of you may have seen the signs around in our areas. We have what's called a unidirectional flushing. That over the long term plays big dividends in improving the water quality in a system. We've been doing that for 10 years or longer, and that's something we will continue to do. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Bauman. She's going to speak about sources of lead in the home. And this really was kind of the part of the conversation we really wanted folks to see and get to and understand what are the other risks other than water from lead.
Hi. So it's important to talk about the other sources of lead. I'm with the Washington County Public Health Department, and we receive all reports of elevated blood lead levels, and typically those are coming in from children's test results. When we receive a report of an elevated blood lead level, we contact families and try and help them identify where the possible exposure might be coming from so that it can be identified and removed so that the child is no longer exposed to those sources. So a lot of what we do is education. And so I want to go over just a few of the perhaps surprising sources of lead that are still in our environment. Bill has talked about a little bit of the history, and lead has been used in many products for a long time. It's still in products that are around today, and from past uses, there can still be environmental exposures. So what we see again and again is that lead-based paint is a really important source of concentrated lead exposure, especially for children. And with lead-based paint, it was primarily used up until 1978. So that's a really important date to think about when looking for possible lead exposures. Another important date is 1950, because up until 1950, there was much more use of lead-based paint. Slowly, there was more awareness about the health effects, and up until 1978, when it was banned for use in paints. So it was thought to be a really good durable product and had good opaqueness, and so it was used on many homes, many bridges. And so today, a lot of our older homes may still have lead-based paint inside, outside, on windows. And so that's a really important source when it starts to break down. And with kids being on the floor, liking to put things in their mouths, the lead dust that can come, say if windows are opening and closing and little bits breaking off, that can be an important source. Or as lead-based paint deteriorates on exteriors, it flakes off, can bind to the soil, and so soil tracked indoors can then be another source of lead exposure as well. We've already touched on home plumbing being a potential source, and mentioning the soil and the dust contamination. That's also an important source. And then also some imported goods. So the U.S. has really been trying to decrease the use of lead in products, but other countries have been slow to transition as well. So it can be found still on toys, some enamel paints used on toys, and jewelry, lead jewelry, little tokens can still be found. Pottery and glazes can also be a source. And as we talked about the importance of pH when acidic foods are placed on those sorts of glazed ceramics or in leaded crystal, it can really bring out that lead, and so people can consume them that way. Candies have been sources. Other foods prepared that can also pull in some of the lead if they're placed in dishes or prepared in dishes that have lead. Folk medicines, some home remedies that are still used today. Oftentimes we see it coming in from Mexico. There are some traditional medicines that have lead as well, or even cosmetics. So kohl, or the eyeliner, used a lot in the Middle East or in India, it has also lead in it. So those are important things to identify and get out of reach of people that are vulnerable. And relevant a lot for us is our work and hobby exposures. So stained glass, some of the products used in putting together those stained glass are made out of lead. They're lead binders or they're lead solders. Lead is nice and heavy, so it's used in a lot of fishing weights. When people get into remodeling, they can also be exposed to lead that's maybe covered up. And in automotive, we used to have leaded gasoline, and so there's still potentially some lead exposures from that. Guns and firing ranges, so lead and ammunitions can also be a potential source. And adults might be doing those work and hobbies elsewhere, but unless they take good care to get rid of all that dust, they could potentially bring that into the home environment where young children can be exposed to it. And then also industrial exposures. So there's still lead smelting, lead mining, and it's used in some other production as well. So those are other potential sources. And also orchards, interestingly. There used to be some lead-based pesticides that were applied in orchards, but that's since been banned, but there could still be some residue in some old orchards. So steps you can take. I'm turning it over to you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, very good. So a lot of potential sources of lead out there, and back to home plumbing, water standing in home plumbing. One of the many, but probably the easiest to eliminate your exposure to lead. And number one is just, as we talked about before, using cold water only for any water you're going to ingest. That's water for drinking, water for cooking, water for making formula. If you're going to make a pot of spaghetti, sometimes it seems convenient and might take less energy to just fill it up off the hot side. It'll take less time to boil, maybe a minute or two less, but that hot water can really corrode quite a bit quicker. So just always go to the cold water tap anytime you're going to use that water to take it in and ingest it. And when you use the cold water, flush it first. Particularly when you wake up in the morning or come home from work, that water's been sitting in that plumbing and corroding. We have really soft water here. We pay attention to the pH, but water is a universal solvent, so it's going to want to pull stuff out of that pipe into solution, take it out of, bring it into solution, sorry. And the best defense against that is just turning on your cold water, fill up the pot sprinkler, and you can feed the plants with it. Just making sure you're running that water typically till it's cold is the best way to determine if you've run it long enough. Your plants won't mind too much, I don't think. Don't boil your water to remove lead. It'll actually concentrate it. What it'll do is you start out with, say, a liter of water, and after that boiling, that condensation, that steam will come out, the lead stays put, so there's actually a higher concentration of lead in that water. So boiling does not remove lead. And periodically, it's a good idea to take your aerator off. So the screen on the end of your faucet, the newer kitchen faucets are a little trickier to do this too. But if you can do it, if you can remove it, it's a good idea to do it periodically. If you notice that the flow at your sink is kind of diminishing, if the water isn't coming out as quickly as it normally had, pop that aerator off, just kind of turn it over and run some water through it. You may see some particulate in there. There may be, if you have old plumbing, it could be iron, could be something else, but lead can accumulate in the aerator. And last of all, just get your water tested. It's free. We have a lot of information available out there that has the lead line number on there, 988-4000. You just call that number. They'll send you the test kit in the mail. No one has to come to your home. You test it by yourself, typically at the kitchen sink. Just follow the directions. You stick the bottle back into the self-addressed stamped envelope. Postage is paid. You send that back to the laboratory. You'll receive your results within 5 to 6 weeks. That's the best steps you can take. A lot of people think, wow, do I have to replace my home plumbing? Do I have to buy a really expensive filter? No. Run that water and make sure it's fresh. And as we did see in our 113 parts per billion home, that was a really high result. That was an outlier that we, again, hadn't seen before in the past. But a 2-minute flush got that down below 1 part per billion, essentially a non-detect, and a 2-minute flush really made the difference there. So, Dr. Baumann, back to you.
So preventing lead exposure, I think bottom line, just awareness of the various sources of leads can really go a long way to preventing exposure. I spoke about homes built before 1978. And with those, some key things are to renovate safely. Sometimes we like to do things on our own, but being aware that there could be lead-based paint in the areas that we're working can help us take some steps to help prevent spreading some of that lead around the house and potentially exposing other people. So renovating safely is a really key thing. Removing lead paint, repairing it, or sealing it in. Really, with lead paint, what you want to do is to keep it from being in a form where people can take it in. Keeping it from being in a form where people can eat it or inhale the dust. And so if you can contact a certified lead specialist to remove that paint, that's ideal. They can do that safely. Or if you can just repair it so that it's not chipping, it's not turning into dust, that's also ideal. Or sealing it in, just covering it up and keeping it in really good repair. Wet cleaning. So if you think that there may be some lead paint around, doing really frequent cleaning with wet rags. That way you're not kicking up a lot of dust, not using a vacuum cleaner that can kick up a lot of dust and spread it even more. So keeping things wet will really grab more of it. And also knowing that, as I talked about, lead can really bind to soil. So as it's shedding from the house, it can be there. And so keeping kids from playing in bare soil can go a long way toward keeping them from being exposed, or having it removed or covering it up is another way to just kind of seal it in and prevent people from getting exposed. Number two, avoiding other sources of lead. So I mentioned there are many still existing products that can expose people to lead. So being aware of those, thinking about ceramics or leaded crystal that might be around, and either not using them for food or maybe getting rid of them. And also knowing industrial sources. So we have some brownfields, which are areas that used to be industrial sites that are now used as residential sites. So potentially old automotive repair or demolition places could be a source of lead exposure. Areas that were used for leaded gasoline, so old gas stations, et cetera. Kind of knowing the history of where you are. And then following safe handling and cleanup practices for jobs and hobbies that use lead-containing products. So these hobbies can certainly be perfectly safe as long as you are using these products safely and cleaning up so that you're not kind of exposing other people. And interestingly, number four, healthy food and good diet. So the body treats lead very much like it does calcium and some other minerals. And so when people are deficient in iron or deficient in lead, I'm sorry, not in lead, and we don't want people to be high in lead. So if they're deficient in iron or if they're deficient in calcium, if they're exposed to lead, their body will try and absorb it more. And so by keeping those minerals in good levels and having a good nutritious diet, you actually decrease how much you absorb if you are exposed to lead. And then public health always likes to promote washing hands frequently. It can do a lot of good things. And in this instance, if you're exposed to lead in the environment, washing your hands will take it right off. And so you're not ingesting it if you're going to eat your sandwich, et cetera. So I'll turn it back over to Bill.
I think I get it.
Is it you?
To Joel.
Okay. It's our first time doing this. We're getting the order done. So.
Yes, thank you very much for that.
And we shuffled the deck, too.
Yeah, it's good reminders too. My house was built in 1941, so I do slight renovations and I need to make sure I remember that myself. So there is lead paint in there. I could obviously guarantee at this point. So the future of lead and water quality monitoring. So we want to just present to you a few things about where we're going in the future, which is obviously why we're up here tonight. So, this is partnering with regional water suppliers and Washington County Health. We are actively working towards some testing and outreach programs in conjunction with the county and our other water providers in the area. That would be Beaverton, Hillsborough, Forest Grove, and some of the other ones in the Washington County area. So what we're trying to do is just provide that link between water quality and public health. Really trying to, again, get people the tools and resources they need when they are concerned about public health and water and how those two tie together, and getting the appropriate help. So stuff we're working on right now, obviously, and more information, please do contact us and ask us about this. We're always happy to discuss it. Another important part of this news will be TVWD in 2017 will no longer be working or testing within the Joint Monitoring Program. We are going to go alone in this. We're going to make sure that we have our own program. One of the primary reasons for us is that this gives us a lot of improved data to help assess our system, really look at those results in even greater detail. TVWD right now takes quite a few samples, as you saw from that previous couple of graphs that we had, a little over 40. So at this point, or going into 2017, we'll be taking 100 or more samples every 6 months from those high-risk homes. High risk meaning homes with the type of plumbing that we know is the biggest risk. And again, that really is improved data for us to help us understand what's going on in our system as a whole and as we work towards a new supply integration. That may seem like a ways out, but in reality, we all know how fast time goes. So we would like to be well ahead of that and really being incredibly proactive about what we do in the district. and more outreach on this topic. I mean, that's why we're here tonight. We want to do continued customer education, providing more technical guidance to the communities. You know, that's why Beaverton's here on this panel too. We were actively communicating with them and some of the other agencies around the area as we've received a lot of inquiries about what they can do in their own buildings, about their own plumbing. So we're trying to be a resource for the community that we serve to make sure that people know what's going on and have the best tools possible. And there are things like revisions to the LCR, that's the lead and copper rule, coming up. You may have heard that in the news. You know, it does take some time for those things to be implemented, but some of those revisions include some of the stuff we're doing already, which is more community outreach, more public awareness, possible programs like we have for free lead testing. And if nobody's too camera shy, raise a hand. Anybody had actually the testing done in their home, taking advantage of that? I see a few folks out there. So as we pointed out earlier, we've had 1,300 of those tests since we started offering that through the Joint Monitoring Program. So that's the kind of stuff that we want to continue regardless of what monitoring program we are in. There's a huge amount of value to that, and we really want our customers to know that that's a really important component of understanding your lead risks. So, and state initiatives. Again, in the news a lot lately, there's a lot of stuff happening. There's some state initiatives with us, with schools as well. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to Nathan with Beaverton Schools so they can talk about what they've been doing and give you a little overview.
Which one goes? Oh, man.
Yeah,
That one.
Yep.
There we go. I think like much of the nation, we watched Flint happen, and we were wondering if it could happen to us. Then we saw Portland Public start entering some of its very significant challenge, and we decided we better start taking a forward stance, because the first thing we discovered is, as the description of the laws had sort of advanced, there was no legal requirement for testing. So the first question that started is, do we have a problem? We did not know. We looked back through our files and we found some testing data just based on when people had complained about water quality. We go test the water to make sure it was okay. It was mostly biological testing. Back in the lead band era, we got notified of faucets that were on recall because of high lead content. There was a whole campaign back in the late 80s to remove all that in the district. And then we went on our merry little way until this crisis started to crescendo. And for us, it really hit the media in March of this year at Highland Park. We had a very technologically savvy kid snap a photo and post to Twitter of a water fountain spewing out brown water. Highland Park's history is it has a galvanized plumbing system which is rusting. And item 4 on one of those previous slides about dumping out the aerator, when we did that, metal flakes were coming out. So we knew we had a problem with the plumbing system there, the domestic distribution system, and is actually scheduled for replacement. But what we did is then we did our normal protocol was to go test the water. And lo and behold, we were surprised. We tested 5 locations. 2 of them came back hot for lead. One was a water fountain in a basketball activity room, which was 22 or 21.2 parts per billion. And one was in a back corridor where we had a water fountain that was a source of vandalism. The kids loved jamming a pencil into the water thing and plugging it and flooding it. The custodian shut the water fountain off to minimize that damage that was occurring. The problem was when you come and test your water, the EPA has a protocol for how long the water should be sitting in that pipe for. Well, it had been sitting in there for 4 months. We turned it on, tested it, and naturally we were going to discover a high sample. After we discovered that lead sample, we felt we just joined the Portland Public Rodeo at that point. I think we took a few trips through the newspapers. Parallel, the maintenance department, my department, we started figuring out what was going on. So we went and serviced these fountains. We reached out to a lot of our stakeholders, the water company, some technical engineering types that could help us kind of develop a testing protocol. Came back and tested it to the EPA standards, and we saw at least it came towards compliance. But it did definitely identify that we did not have an answer for the public. And as a user, we have 40,000 kids in the Beaverton School District. We have them there for approximately 12 years of their lives, and they're in those formative years where the medical professionals would say you should probably have a better plan than no plan. So we have taken a very proactive stance. That, you know, as we did our initial assessment of the plumbing systems of the entire district, we looked for copper, we looked for pre-1986 plumbing systems. You got to love the 1970s. I think about 2/3 of the district was built in that era. Fortunately, we've had a very proactive program of replacing our plumbing systems because of just aesthetic issues. That when we started wading into this process, hold on, let me figure the buttons. We reached out to PBS Environmental and kind of put together the panic contract. $200,000 contract. We're testing 6,300 points throughout the district, basically any place you can get drinking water from. Drinking faucets, production kitchens. We have faucets in classrooms. Surprisingly, if you'd think which school has more drinking fountains in it, a high school or an elementary. An elementary actually has about 50 more drinking fountains than a high school does, even though the student population is about 2,000 apart. And what we have embarked on, which we just completed, is we've sampled all 52 of our schools and 8 support facilities. Now, like everybody else in this process, we're waiting for those results to come back because all the labs are completely backlogged now. The last conversation we had with our contractors were about 17,000 samples back. So of our 52 facilities, we've seen results for 8. Now we're trying to grind through how to interpret those results because we unfortunately asked for raw lab data and now have to get educated on how to read raw lab data. So our engineer is trying to help us, what is that interpretive data? And to couple with that, you hear numbers like 15 parts per billion action level. There's an EPA manual that talks about 20 parts per billion action level. So we are trying to see where the Board of Education lands and says what we will do and any actions that we'll take. Right now, we're proactively shutting off anything above 15, just so we're not in this land of concern. And fortunately, being summer, we don't have a lot of kids in the building, so that's something that's greatly helping us. Also, what is helping us is we have approximately $6.5 million of our 2014 capital improvement bond that was dedicated to plumbing improvements throughout our districts. 5 schools are having domestic water work done on them. 2 of those schools are full replacements. The rest are partial components that are replaces the service lines that we're talking, not lead replacement, galvanized. That seems to be the bulk of our problem. We have a lot of steel pipe. Steel pipe rusts, you get brown water. And that is kind of our challenge. We also had 14 of our schools get addressed in the 26 bond program, or the 2006 bond program. All points are being tested for lead. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of copper plumbing in our schools, so we've not had to test for a lot of copper. That's pretty much the driving factor. If we have copper, we test for copper. But like I was saying, galvanized plumbing systems, there's not a lot of copper to go find. And then also what we're trying to do is manage how do we distribute all of this findings. And we're up to a few LA County phone books worth of lab results. We're getting a lot of assessments back. We have maps. We're trying to figure out plans. So what we're doing is we're trying to configure how we're going to load and post. And this is the website, and I think this presentation is going to be available. It's a clickable link. But we're going to post all of our information to this site. It is currently active. There's just no data sitting out there right now. Like I said, we just started receiving our results back from the lab. Another 58 of them, and we should be there. But with that, I think I hand it back to you. There you go.
Yeah, so I'm going to have Dave speak here in the end, but before we do that, just to sort of summarize a little bit of that too, and just talk about a couple more things really quickly. One, any questions you have at the end, if you kind of know who talked about the slide, Alex will help and direct it to this person or whoever here is on the panel regarding your question. And then, yeah, just about Beaverton's thing too. We do serve a large portion of Beaverton customer or Beaverton schools. That's kind of one of the reasons why we're involved too, and we do have multiple sources that we talked about in the beginning. That's another sort of important factor about the different aspects of those sources, a little different chemistry as we move into the new supply. This is why we want to have a lot more data, because we really want to be, again, proactive about how we monitor and what we're looking at, just to provide as much data to make our decisions, the best decisions possible as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dave, and he's going to conclude tonight with a little bit about our Willamette Supply Program.
Yeah, just a few slides about the program that we are currently implementing, working on. Here's some facts and figures about it. This map is probably a little hard to read from where you're at, but down here at the Willamette River is where it starts and treatment is provided. And then the transmission main brings it up to our service area, Beaverton, Hillsborough, and through this pipeline up through here, and then storage up on Cooper Mountain. So we have a 65 million gallon a day water treatment plant, two 15 million gallon reservoirs, 30 miles of pipeline that range in size from about 66-inch diameter at the largest end, which would be down in Wilsonville, kind of going up to those reservoirs, and then necking down to 48-inch. The two owners of the program right now are TVWD and the City of Hillsborough, at a 60-40 split shown there right now, and scheduled completion, as I mentioned earlier, about 10 years from now. Or as Mark would want me to say, exactly 10 years from now. We have to be done by then.
Like 9 years and 11 months, but
Who's keeping track? Yeah, you are. I know that. So we have a multi-pronged approach for not only producing but also delivering high water quality, and it starts with the state-of-the-art water treatment plant. Processing water from the Willamette River will have all the bells and whistles basically that we have and we know of today to protect the community and produce the highest quality water that we can. Then from that, we have an operation strategy. We're developing an operation strategy for preserving that water quality. Once it's produced, we spend a lot of money producing this high quality water. How do we make sure it actually gets to the customers in that same quality of water? And we have a whole operations plan to make sure that that happens. And then, as I mentioned before, a little bit in my talk about Flint, we're also working on an integration plan about now that we're bringing in this new water source into these existing distribution systems, we want to make sure that there's no upsets from that and that the water systems are conditioned for this new water supply, and we've done all the planning and preparations for it. As far as the timeline, again, as I mentioned, it's going to be done in 2026. What's going on right now is, well, what has been happening is studies, preliminary design, and we're actually getting underway on some construction elements. And through the next year and on through 2025 is when all the construction is happening. And there's a lot more information and details. It's not all going to be built at once. It's going to be built in pieces along the way. And there's a whole strategy in terms of how we're doing that as well. And then online by June of 2026 is when we'll be online. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have about the program. There's a lot of details I could get into about that. But I think with that, I'll pass it back to Joel.
Okay. Please join me in giving our panel a hand. Thank you.